Chinese felt absolutely humiliated when the United States bombed the Chinese embassy in Belgrade. Now, of course, the Americans say it was an accident, it was an accident. The Chinese didn't believe it. But what did the Chinese do? They said, no, we cannot. This is not our time. Let's wait. Let's bide our time. That time will come when we will decide what to do, but let's be patient. Let's first accumulate strength and not cut off all our ties. Yet, if you look at the two largest global international economic organizations, the IMF and the World Bank, which were set up in the late 1940s, even till today, you have a rule that says that to become the head of the IMF, you must be European, and to become the head of the World Bank, you must be an American. So 4 billion Asians don't qualify to run the IMF and the World Bank, even though their economies are now much more dynamic and vibrant. But the sheer refusal of the West to adjust and accept a world that it no longer dominates.
President Obama and Vice President Biden want to see a rising China. We don't fear a rising China. We welcome a rising China.
We'll also take on directly the challenges posed by our prosperity, security, and democratic values by our most serious competitor, China.
From the CPC was that as much as you had the Long March fighting imperialist forces, the Japanese fighting nationalists, you don't leave that. Even going to space, there are terms that a long march into space.
Most important lesson from these changes that have occurred over the years, particularly as it relates to China, among others, is the rise of the development model. It is important for the developing world to seek to draw lessons from in consideration of their own conditions, but also adapting that to their particular circumstances. China has explored boldly various institutional innovations and drawn on other strengths while giving way to its own strength, gradually shaping its own model of development.
就在几天前，我美国的奶奶在我弟弟挑食的时候叫他好好吃完，因为许多美国的孩子正在挨饿。我70年出生的父亲提醒了奶奶，他小时候挑食时，奶奶叫他好好吃饭的理由是因为许多中国的孩子正在挨饿。
Our leaders denounce the Communist Party that runs China. The Communist Party has been running China since 1949. It's the Communist Party of China that Kissinger and Nixon went to visit in order to reopen relations with them. It's the Communist Party of China that ran China for the last 30 years, during which virtually every major American corporation went to China, invested in China, produced in China. Now, at the end of 30 years of it, to say, gee, it didn't work out quite the way we wanted, that's not the basis of a mature country's international position. That's a politician looking to get some votes by posturing. We thought Mr. Biden had learned from Mr. Trump not to go down that route. Instead, he's looking more and more like Trump.
We spy on everybody, dummy. We just don't advertise it.
We spy because we love.
Like the U.S. on France.
Just a few years after Governor Winthrop utters these words about being a city on a hill, just a few years later, the people in the city on a hill move out to massacre the Pequot Indians, who seem to think they belong on this land. That process of not being just a city on a hill, but of moving out, of expanding, continued. That's a persistent fact of American history, going all the way back to those first settlers and coming down to the present day.
US politicians are stating that we need to decouple from China. Everything from China should be banned. Chinese students, Chinese apps, Chinese digital payments. Essentially, we want to completely separate from China. Meanwhile, American companies, that are these are the ones that are driving forward the United States economy. They're doing the opposite. They're doubling down their efforts. They're increasing their marketing budgets. They are focusing more on China because, again, it is an incredibly important market for these global companies as they look to expand around the world because we live in a global economy.
Do you believe that there is proof of the same?
There is absolutely no evidence for that at all. There is no evidence that this was a virus that was created in a lab. There is no evidence at all that it ever was in a lab. In fact, we've worked with the lab in Wuhan for 15 years now. We know everything they do, and we know that they do not have that virus in the lab prior to the SARS outbreak. It's never been found prior to the SARS outbreak.
How do you know they didn't have it in the lab?
Well, because we found about over 500 of these bat coronaviruses in collaboration with our colleagues in China. We arrange the field work, we manage the work that's done. We see all the data that comes through from the lab as soon as it's done. We've been doing this for 15 years. I've worked with this group for 15 years. I've never seen any evidence of anyone saying things that aren't true or even hinting of anything untoward from that lab. It just did not happen.
I guess maybe it's just a pride issue. Maybe Americans are just like, you know what? I want to be number one. We can't have China being number one. And maybe it's a little bit of a pride issue, but it's not going to fundamentally really change anything in the United States other than make a news headline. So again, I think there's so much fear mongering that has been coming from United States politicians that has really been painting China as this very, evil force that is trying to take over the world. I just don't see that. This is a big difference between our two countries, the United States and China. We see the United States, for example, regime change is a very large part of our foreign policy. We go around the world and we literally try to change regimes. We would like to see that every country around the world has a democracy, preferably a United States-styled democracy. And this is something that we do not see with China. China does not go around the world spreading its form of government, does not spread communism anywhere around the world. And it very much is an inwardly focused country. I think this is a very big difference between China and the United States. China really focuses what's going on in China, and when they do go abroad, as for example, the Belt and Road Initiative is certainly China going abroad, it's really just focused on business. How do we increase trade? How do we do business? Nothing political.
One of the most pathetic sights in my mind was when the G7 leaders met recently and started making pronouncements on saying, China, you must do A, China, you must do B, China, you must do C. Excuse me. Who are these G7 countries? They represent the powers of the past. Their total population is what, 750 million, right? Half of China's. Maybe the same as Southeast Asia. Why should they arrogate upon themselves the right to pass judgments? That era when the West could do that is gone. So clearly, if the United States was a reasonable, logical actor on the global stage, it would just get rid of this tariffs and sanctions, but it's not possible to do so. And the fact that it's not possible to do so indicates how strong the anti-China sentiment has become in the American body politic. And so even that's something that is by any Western standards of reasoning, that trade tariffs and sanctions should be removed, they cannot be removed because of the strong anti-China sentiment in the American body politic. One Harvard professor very wisely said, well, that's like telling China that if you don't listen to me, I'll shoot myself in the foot again. The trade tariffs have hurt American consumers, have hurt American workers, have hurt the American economy, and haven't damaged China, right? Why the current course with China is wrong? And it is wrong for a very simple reason. The Biden administration, which has inherited the policies of the Trump administration, has not worked out a strategy on to deal with China? Just ask yourself a very simple question. Before you work out a strategy, you got to work out your strategic goals. And you ask yourself a simple question. What are the goals that the Trump administration was trying to accomplish with China? And what are the goals that the Biden administration is trying to accomplish with China? And the answer is zero. You can't, there's no answer. There's no clear answer.